Is that who I should be sending it to?
I think so.
Okay. Just wasn't sure, because I'll send it to you.
Okay.
Is this yours?
All right. We will get started with our December student achievement meeting. But before we get started, I'll have to entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the November meeting.
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Edmonds.
Second.
Second by Ms. Johnson-Hostler. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Nay, same sides. The ayes have it. The minutes are passed, and I will turn over to Dr. Wilson Norman to get us started for our meeting today. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. We have our first agenda topic, which is elevating arts and education. And we shared a little bit about this topic it was on a consent item at our November board meeting. And today we're bringing back so we can go into some detail about our arts diploma endorsement. And like with everything, we want to outline our desired outcomes. And it really is to provide an overview of the state's arts graduation credit requirement and the diploma endorsement. To demonstrate the connections of Priority 1 of the Wake County Public Schools Strategic Plan and how it ties to graduation. And then outline current strategies that are underway to support equitable access for all students. That this particular presentation aligns to Aim 2 and Aim 8 of our strategic plan. And at this time, Mr. Tucker will walk you through our graduation requirements and this endorsement opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson Norman. And Chair Swanson and Superintendent Taylor, it's great to be with all of you and board today. Arts education, as we know, in Wake County Schools is a core component of our mission to provide students with a well-rounded education. By emphasizing arts education, we help our students develop critical skills like creativity, problem solving, and collaboration, which we all know at this table are keys to success. As we move forward in discussing the importance of arts education, it's crucial to recognize its impact on student success. Research consistently demonstrates that when the arts are treated as a core subject, students not only discover their passions, but they also achieve higher academic outcomes. And here in Wake County, I like to always say that we consider the arts one of our core subject areas in our strategic plan. A recent study by the AMT Lab highlights that students exposed to arts education as part of the core curriculum see significant improvements in their SAT and standardized test scores. We all know that, but this was a study that was released last year that I thought was important to highlight. It reinforces the idea that arts education plays a vital role in developing well-rounded and academically successful individuals. The data supports our strategic focus that we're placing on arts as an integral part of our educational framework. On our next slide, we're going to delve a little deeper in the timeline and also what the state graduation requirement asks of our students. There's two things I want to make sure we are clear that we're covering today. One is our state law graduation requirement, and the other is the new diploma endorsement. So we'll start with the graduation requirement. Starting in 2022 to 23, students that entered grade 6 who would now be entering grade 9 next year must complete 1 credit of arts education between grades 6 and 12. No changes in the total 22 required graduation credits. The arts credit is part of the 6 electives that students can earn in high school. It can also be completed as one of those elective credits, or it could be completed in middle school. So it could be completed from 6th to 12th grade. Students must complete the full standard course of study in the arts course in order to fulfill the requirement. So partial courses or exposure courses, for example, you might hear them referred to as a wheel in 6th grade. After-school activities do not meet that state law. The course must be state recognized by arts education, which includes the standard course of study covered in the course. So local electives and quarter classes would not fulfill that requirement. I just want to reiterate that. I put that in there twice, 2 different ways. We do have one exemption provided by the state law. Only students who transfer into the public school system from out of state according to the law after grade 9 are exempt from the requirement if taking the course would prevent them from graduating with their cohort. It's the only exemption in the law. The updated North Carolina School Board of Education policy, Grad 004, underscores the state's dedication for making arts education a vital component for every student's academic journey. So I wanted to just take a minute to briefly go over how Wake County Schools is implementing and supporting our educators with this new requirement. So first, we want to look at course alignment. We're focused on ensuring that all arts education courses are fully aligned with state standards as articulated by the state. This alignment is critical because it establishes consistency across our district and promotes equitable access to high-quality arts education for all students, no matter their school or no matter their background. By adhering to these standards, we ensure that every student receives a meaningful standards-based arts education experience that contributes to their overall academic growth. Looking at professional development and how we support our educators, we're offering professional development opportunities in professional learning communities in arts for our arts educators. These sessions are intentionally designed to equip our arts teachers with tools and strategies that they need to implement this requirement effectively. Our goal is to ensure that our educators feel confident and supported. By investing in their success, we are directly impacting the quality of instruction that all of our students receive. And last, school support. We're providing district-wide resources in our department to support and help schools integrate this new requirement. That includes some examples like guidance on scheduling, new curriculum materials, and additional resources tailored to meet the needs of our individual schools. Our aim in academics is to make sure that transition is smooth as possible so that schools can focus on what matters the most, giving students access to the transformative power of arts education. So I'm going to move on to the diploma endorsement, and then we'll have a minute for some conversation. So the diploma endorsement is new, and it began actually at the last General Assembly session in 2024. It was passed into policy then. The proficiency endorsement was incorporated into the State Board of Education policy, Grad 007, and that addition reflects the growing recognition of arts education. In North Carolina, students in public and charter schools have the opportunity to earn one or more endorsements on their high school diploma. These endorsements signify that students are prepared for both college and career pathways, with the arts proficiency endorsement adding a unique focus on creative and artistic achievement. To qualify for the arts endorsement, students must complete a minimum of 4 courses that are aligned with the North Carolina Standard Course of Study, which may include advanced placement courses or IB courses. Students also must maintain a GPA of 3.0 or higher in all 4 of those courses. In addition to that coursework, students are required to complete 40 hours of arts-related extracurricular activities between grades 9 and 12, outside of those instructional hours that they receive during the school day. These activities broaden their real-world arts experiences and provide opportunities for deeper engagement in their chosen discipline. They also have to document their activities and write a short reflection, and they must be submitted through their school teacher and their counselor to ensure authenticity and thoughtful participation. I did note at the bottom that that the policy is mandatory for public schools. However, it does remain optional for charter schools. And then our last slide is just a little bit of background on the approved activities that were on the consent agenda 2 weeks ago. I did want to share with all of you that I met with all of our high school arts department chairs to collaborate with them to come up with these extracurricular activities for our students. I wanted to make sure that we created a thorough and diverse list that would be inclusive of all of our students' communities to be able to get this endorsement. So first, I've divided them into 3 separate areas: performing arts, visual arts, and then general arts engagement for you. In the performing arts, students can fulfill their extracurricular arts hours through a variety of performing art activities, including auditions, participating in musicals, performing in community events, mentoring younger students in the performing arts. Rehearsals, private lessons in music, dance, or theater also count, making it easier for students to actively engage in the performing arts to meet the requirement. In the visual arts, students have the options like exhibiting artwork, participating in art competitions, engaging in community art projects. Students can also contribute by assisting with art shows or helping project displays, providing valuable behind-the-scenes experience with contributing to all the arts community. And then last, beyond discipline-specific opportunities, students can also engage in workshops, internships, participate in technical roles such as lighting, sound, set design that also fulfills the requirement. These options ensure students can explore their interests while gaining a hands-on arts experience. The last thing I wanted to share is that this list of activities, which you have copies and you've already received, you can refer to for clarity. They ensure that the requirement is accessible to all students, including those that are involved in community-based arts settings. Whether through school programs or local organizations, we want to make sure that all students have the opportunity to engage in these opportunities. One other item that I wanted to share with all of you at the table is that the state passed this year. So current seniors that graduate next semester are able to complete and earn that diploma endorsement for this year. And last, I just wanted to give you a sneak peek of what's to come in the spring with our Fine Arts Visionary Framework. We're excited to share Wake County's Arts Education Framework, and it's progressing quite well. In the coming months, we'll present a more thorough update and ask the board's adoption for a 5-year plan for arts education in Wake County. Dr. Taylor, Dr. Wilson-Norman, and Mr. Cook and I have met with community members, including district leadership, parents, teachers, and some incredible students, to establish 4 priorities that will guide our plan and our framework. This is a real sneak peek because here are the 4 priorities. They are investing in human and physical resources, aligning resources and leadership for growth. Number 3 is educating stakeholders on the value of arts. And number 4 is maximizing opportunities in the arts for students. And we look forward to providing you details soon and discussing on how we can continue to elevate arts education in our district. And now I'm happy to take any questions that you all might have.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Tucker. It's always a pleasure to see you and have you share the great things that's happening in the arts department. We'll go around for a couple of questions. I'll start with Chair Haggerty, and then we'll just go around.
Thank you, Vice Chair Swanson. So, Mr. Tucker, as we both know, you know a lot of graduating seniors in the arts. And so one of the questions when we first announced this that's come back to me has been, what the requirements are, and you've laid those out. When it comes to documenting time from previous years, if they didn't document it contemporaneous to when they did the work, are they able to go back and do that now? What sort of standards are you going to hold them to for, if they believe and they can show they've done the work each year to get here, what exactly will they need to produce if they weren't keeping an active log back then?
Yeah. And I think the state took that into account when it passed the law. There is an official document that DPI has provided us. They can document their hours of their activities, and they would have an advisor sign off on that, and they would give that to their teacher for approval. So they're able to use coursework in the past to be able to get the endorsement this year.
They just need the teacher to sign off on it.
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Chair, one final question with it. When we talk about arts courses, I didn't know how broadly that's defined. Obviously, visual and performing arts, but does that reach to things like creative writing or film study or things like that, radio or TV production? Maybe not.
So in some instances it does. So in North Carolina, they recognize art as dance, music, theater, and visual arts right now. And they typically signify that with a 5 in our course code catalog. And so it does have to be a course that meets those requirements, that has one of the arts standard course of study with it to its entirety.
And if a student had a question about that, how would they verify it?
They're welcome to ask their teacher, or they can reach directly to me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Of course. Dr. Ng, do you have a question?
Yeah, I do have a question. In terms of the visual arts, what's been has there been kind of collaboration with the art museums, and what form does it take?
One of our milestones this past year that academics is really proud of is our collaboration with the North Carolina Museum of Art with Pieces of Gold. It's taking that event and separating it from the performing arts event, Pieces of Gold, and creating Gifts of Gold. And they have housed enough space for us and hosted us with enough space to have artwork from every single school at that art museum. So we'll have around 200 pieces of art in the museum in the spring. And that's due to our partnership with the North Carolina Museum of Art. I think I saw you there last year, and it was quite an event. The other thing that the North Carolina Museum of Art does is provide some incredible professional development for our arts educators that's free. For them in their content area, if they're looking for any kind of credit renewal that we may not be able to offer right here in the district, we partner with them to be able to learn from that entity.
Great. Thank you.
I'll also say my 8th grader did a field trip to the art museum about 3 weeks ago, and she was able to tell me the history of the pieces that she saw, that she learned from the docent, and just hearing your kid connect with an art in a different way and learning from, like, not mom or dad explaining something was really powerful to hear just her share that piece and her interpretation of it. And yeah, that was huge. So even just for field trips alone, that's a huge piece.
Did you since you have the floor, do you want to have a question or anything?
No, I just wanted to add to that.
Gotcha. Well, thank you. Ms. Caulfield, did you have a question?
No, I love this. I think it's wonderful. I know that kids do a lot with the theater and everything in school, and just when it gets the whole school involved, even kids that are not directly, like just theater, for example, like they love seeing their friends up on stage, and it's just encouraging, and it just kind of grows from there. And I think it's wonderful. So I'm really excited about this one.
I do have a follow-up similar to Chair Haggerty regarding those students who are graduating this year. And I thank you did note the documentation of activities were listed here. I'm curious of how they would, how the connection is made, one, to students who are seniors who are not as tuned into something like this. I mean, we're halfway through the year. So I'm assuming it's maybe school counselors, because here it says that their short reflection includes the guidance counselor. But again, I don't have a kid anymore, but I would be worried if I did of how to make sure that they were aware that this was also an offering to them.
Sure. So in the arts department, we're rolling this out to all the arts educators who would touch students that are enrolled in courses this semester and next semester. In academics, we're rolling that out to all of our principals, that this is what is the approved list, and then the process to achieve that endorsement. Yeah.
So follow up.
Sure.
So again, if I just use my own kiddo who danced in her community, but did music in her school.
That's good.
So I guess I'm also curious about how making sure a senior or 11th grader like that would be able to understand what their process of documentation would be, because what they do in school and out of school, they're two different arts, but they're not the same.
So they could get the endorsement by doing two separate areas,
Okay.
two different realms of art. So for the dance in the community, nonprofit, or wherever they dance, they would write a sentence, someone to sign off. They could take it to their music teacher that they were enrolled in then, and they would then approve that.
Okay.
And all teachers will have this guidance of what's approved, so that there's some standardization around the district of what kids are allowed to do.
I mean, clearly, again, it's an example. My kid danced and did music at school, but there's some kids who separate them, and so it just dawned on me, how would they know? So thank you.
Good.
So I do have one before I go to Ms. Edmonds, if that's okay.
No, please go ahead.
Along those same lines, what is the deadline for those students to begin submitting those process to get their recognition on their diplomas?
So we would look for that in March, and we'll make sure that we're communicating that out in the channels that I just spoke, just to make sure that it's really clear so that they do earn that, they have that signifier. We'll say something that the state will not be able to do is add the digital badge this year. It will be available next year. But there are many kids, as you all are kind of inferencing, that already have this endorsement just by being at one of our schools.
Right.
If they are doing the color purple at Nightdale High School, they've already got plenty of hours to be able to have this recognition.
And would we be able to, I don't know, create a poster or something that we can put throughout schools so when parents are walking in, kids may not remember, their parents may have something different. So just trying to make sure that we can also get the parents involved in this. So therefore, if there's some hours that they may be short, the parents can do some digging or whatnot. It sparks some good conversation, I guess. Ms. Evans?
So that was part of my question, is how are we communicating this change to parents? And then my other question is, what was the requirement before this new law?
Around the graduation requirement.
Yes.
Yeah, so this has gone out in many, many, many counselor newsletters into schools. And this actually started during COVID. This was passed. I think that we can still overly communicate, especially to parents and students and teachers. We still have our work cut out for us there. What was the second part of the question?
Just what was the requirement before? Because I thought arts was required before this change, but I may be wrong.
It was not. I think that we had the North Carolina college diploma that might have encouraged an arts course, but it was never a requirement for high school, for a diploma in North Carolina.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
When we look at this, when Mr. Cook and I looked at this, we find about 93 to 94% of our kids in Wake County already are completing this. So we're in good shape when we look statewide.
Great.
Yes, Ms. Mahaffey?
Is this a conversation that middle school counselors are having with their students since it does start in 6th grade?
Yeah, we had that conversation last week with the counselors, and we're spending intentional time with our middle school counselors right now, especially those that have 8th graders moving to 9th grade for the next 2 years is our plan, to help them map out what they need to do in 9th grade in order to fulfill that requirement. The last thing we want is kids that may become a senior and don't want to be in an arts course for whatever reason. So we're trying to make sure there's a pathway for them to fulfill this as soon as possible.
I do have a question from Mr. Hershey that he just sent to me. He said, aside from virtual classes at the middle school level, are we working towards having at least one non-virtual art class in middle school that would meet that requirement?
Sure. We already do have in-person options at the majority of our schools that meet the requirement. If principals in some of our early college schools are looking for creative ways to fulfill the requirement, we know that NCVPS is an option. And we also know that there may be a partnership with another school where we could have an educator teach a course at that school so that they have in-person instruction. So we're already working with some of our principals to help them design what's going to be best for their schools. Yeah.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? All right, not seeing none. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to some updates on this in the future.
Thank you. We're going to switch out teams.
There you go.
We're the Christmas team. Yes, you are. Gotta feel good these days.
Our next presentation is about advancing student wellness with behavioral health and discipline practices. Embedded in this presentation is our annual report that we bring our suspension data. And so we want to share with you many of our data, but we also want to share with you the practices that are underway to be both proactive as well as we have to respond to inappropriate behavior. So we want to show both sides of the continuum. That when we think about our behavioral health framework, you've heard about that several times, that we want to continue to define the behavioral health framework. We want to summarize our suspension trend data and highlight areas of improvement with emphasis on disparities across schools and across groups of students. And we want to outline and guide you in the behavioral interventions and supports that we have put in place and those that we are working to continue to build. And then share next steps on the work that's underway in behavioral health so that we are reactive in our approach in supporting our students. That this presentation and the work that is taking place in student support services ties to the strategic plan and highlights many aims in the work. That as we think about reducing or increasing attendance, thinking about the equity-focused practices that we have underway, and how we connect with families and communities around discipline and restorative practices. And so we want to kind of provide you with an update to continue to deepen the understanding around behavioral health.
Good afternoon. Looking forward to continuing this conversation that we've had for quite some time, and I'm sure we will continue as we go forward to talk about behavioral health and our desire to put those systems and structures in place in classrooms, in schools, so that students feel welcome and comfortable in the environment that they're in, and they'll be able to achieve the very best academics that they possibly can. So I'm really excited actually about this slide because this word behavioral health has become a very big buzzword in our community, really across the nation. And the term behavioral health, because it is used by so many, can often become a little confusing. So I'm really going to literally read this slide because I think it's important that we kind of centralize our thinking around what we mean when we say the words behavioral health. So for Wake County Public Schools, the term behavioral health encompasses the mental, emotional, and social factors that influence a student's overall well-being and ability to succeed in school. It includes proactive support for challenges such as social emotional learning, behavior management, and mental health needs. Addressing behavioral health strategy begins with creating supportive classroom environments and may involve partnerships with community specialists and to ensure those comprehensive care. So really appreciate that definition and think it helps us define what it is we're hoping to do when we talk about behavioral health and how important that is for the school environment for our students. Additionally, this just aligns exactly with that very statement to think about the fact that in order to achieve the academic success that we desire for our students, we must have student wellness to exist. Students have to feel safe and secure in the classroom and in the school environments in which they live in order to be able to access the needed academic strides that are in front of them. And there is a growing body of evidence that articulates this. CASEL, which is an organization that speaks specifically to social emotional learning, articulates that there's an 11% improvement in academic outcomes when we have the right social emotional and student wellness structures in place in classrooms. So I love this slide, and this is where you'll hear me reference back to this many times as we probably even continue this discussion today, because every behavior has a story. And if you're a parent, you've probably experienced this a lot as a parent. I know I have 4, and more than a few times I have had somebody in my household come up to me and say, this is my story about what just happened with my behavior, right? And we have to, as a parent, make some decisions about what we hear from our children, our students. The same thing is true in a classroom and in a school. We want to make sure that we're understanding that student perspective, and that is the first step for us to really be able to make meaningful change. And in order to have effective behavior structures in a school, behavior is relational, and that relationship between the teacher and the student is critical and able to make that happen. We must have trust and consistency and care, and kids have to feel that. They have to know that that's there. Behavior is also intentional. If we just react every time, we tend to feed the process and the problem along the way, right? We need to make sure we're addressing the why behind those actions, getting to root cause, and really thinking about strategies that we can put in place for kids so that they are self-regulating and making good decisions as they go forward. And then I've said this before, I will continue to say this, we want behavior to be proactive and not reactive. And ultimately, we've got to prioritize, it's hard, I'll be the first to say, the proactive strategies in order to bring down the reactive nature of the work that we often do when we see students that are not behaving as we intend for them to be able to do. This is our behavioral health framework. I shared this now several times with you, but just wanted to reorganize and recenter ourselves around this because at the school level, we talk about 3 of these elements being our core, which means we want to see this in every classroom every day for every student, but we want to make sure that in classrooms there are classroom management and classroom expectations for students, and that those have been explicitly taught to students. We want to make sure there are school-wide expectations that have also been explicitly taught to students, and that there is a social-emotional learning opportunity for students to learn some of the skills that help them become self-regulated and be able to be more successful as they are engaging in partnerships with their peers and setting goals for themselves and really being able to be successful in their learning process and learning journey. We also want to continually ensure that we are infusing restorative and trauma-informed practices into the work that we do every day. You'll hear us talk a little bit more about that today. And also, we want to do this through a tiered response model. So what we provide all students is that core. Then we, of course, if we're looking for students that might be struggling with that, we want to increase supports for those students. I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. And then again, even to the point at which maybe an individualized plan is necessary for students who might need the most intensive level. So this gets to that, exactly. So again, at that core level, we want to make sure there are school-wide expectations in place. I just shared what those 3 are. We are also looking at some universal practices that we can put in place at the supplemental level. We mentioned this in the last few months, talking about specific strategies like check-in, check-out, where a student has the opportunity to go to a trusted adult's classroom and check in when they first come in the morning. They may be working on a specific goal. I'll use homework as an example. Have you completed all your homework or turned it in when you were supposed to have it done? My son, you had a hard time. He'd do the homework at night, but it never made it to the teacher during the day. So it was like, make sure we've done that. That could be a goal that my son might have had. And at the end of the day, they go back to that trusted adult and they check in with them again. How did your day go? Did you turn in your homework? Were those strategies successful? But just a really good opportunity. Again, you're building relationship, but you're also specifically focusing on goals that will help support students. We are also working on restorative conversations that help students think about what might be an opportunity to have articulated something differently that they might have said to a peer or to a teacher, so that they're reflective on what got them to the place where they had that discussion and how might they think about that differently, what could they do different in the future. The reality is, again, once we move students to that intensive level, we do want to think about an individualized plan, a plan that's really focused on what are the needs and the root causes for that specific student. What is it we know that's getting at the heart of that problem? How do we create other strategies rather than continuing that behavior that is not productive? And then what do we need to do next as a result of that? So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Walker, who is going to share a little bit about our annual reporting process that we have.
Good, thank you, Ms. Gibson, and hello, Committee Chair Swanson, board members, good to see you, of course, Dr. Taylor. So while we've heard much, of course, about behavioral health, and we're going to hear more about how we promote positive discipline, right? That's a topic that we just as a school system is a core topic. At the same time, of course, there's this legal kind of policy expectation and component that we need to share this discipline-related data annually with the board and the superintendent, Dr. Taylor. And so, on average, we have probably about 95,000 incidents that are recorded in our school system every year. That's not suspensions, right? That's timeout, right? That's the conference with the student, right? For chewing gum in class, right? It's a lot of different things. But based on policy, we have to share these things, and I made sure that we wrote this out because this is exactly what we put in policy 4345 for student discipline records. And what you have are two distinct things. You have the summary discipline report that was shared with you, and you see, of course, the supplemental presentation. It is a lot of data. We are not short of data in our district, right? The matter is for us is what do we do with it? And this is something that is not only for you, right? It's very important that our community members, our essential partners, right? This is a public data that we want them to know what exactly we have here. And so I'm just going to be with you just for a little bit longer. I think the next slide to talk about, oh, thank you, Ms. Woodson, about some summary discipline data and trends. So this yearly trends, what I want you to do, thank you, is remember that about 5% of our students, when just think about out-of-school suspension, so 5% of our students are subject to suspension, 5%. That's across the years. So conversely, of course, that means 95% of our students never get an out-of-school suspension. That's just very key when we're talking about what this looks like. So while that is, right, I do want to highlight what you're going to see in your supplementary data, what you're going to see in the report, right? We do have an aspect of disproportionality that we're focused on. Remember, disproportionality in our data means an over-representation of a certain group. And so we know that there's disproportionality with our black student population. But even then, right, whenever I'm in front of you, in front of, again, our essential partners and community members, remember that 10% of the black student population are subject to suspension. So 90% of black students are never suspended, right? And that's across the years. Lost days of instruction is something that I've mentioned to you before, and it's something we're utilizing and looking at more often. So this is not just a term referring to out-of-school suspension. So this is a lens that we're using it today, right? Because you can just think of any time a kid loses days of instruction to various things, right? But we're just talking about suspensions here. Because it could be absences, disruptions, school closures, all these particular things. And we have to look at this because we need to highlight areas where interventions or adjustments may be needed to maximize learning opportunities. So, of course, in thinking of like the equity lens and the tenets of our equity policy 1150, analyzing lost days of instruction can highlight even more disparities in access to education, right, based on socioeconomic status, geographic location, things of that sort. And so that's why often when I talk to schools, it's a matter of when we look at the number of suspensions, what is the actual number of days lost to instruction? And so what you, of course, can see in that particular data focused on the past couple years is that, so the number of OSS days, when it came to 22-23 and 23-24, you have a good average of about 100,000 days that have been lost to instruction based on out-of-school suspension. And that's something that we want to look at. What's things, two main points too that we want to clarify, right? It doesn't mean that everything is all sunshine and rainbows, right? But we are going in the right direction, right? This means that schools are doing their best to reduce out-of-school suspension. So it's going down, right, 3%. And it also means, very similar fashion, we do also have a reduction in lost days of instruction with that. So I think I'm definitely proud of that, and we're making a key impact. The question that many of you have for me, and through email or conversations that I have is why maybe it's going down, or what are we doing about it? And that's something that we'll all kind of discuss, but my colleague, Dr. Gooch, will highlight it as well. So with that, Dr. Gooch, I think I'll pass it to you. Yep. No, you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you can go
All
ahead.
right.
Yep, thanks.
Well, discussing restorative practices and walking our way into some of the exciting things that our team is doing in terms of reducing the discipline infractions for students. Restorative practices are really options that are proactive and not reactive. They are opportunities to build positive relationships, to make schools places where students want to be, to recognize that we all make mistakes, and to also help students to learn the skill. Very often we talk about behavior being a skill. Academically, we know students read based on a skill set. The same thing applies to behavior, and this opportunity to learn the skills of expectations, of social interactions, of building and maintaining friendships, and of understanding the expectations in your school. And so really these restorative practices will increase academic achievement, as Dr. Wilson and Ms. Woodson opened up with. They also reduce recidivism, and they also work to narrow those equity gaps or that disproportionality. Ms. Woodson talked a little bit about our intervention model, and so at the core she went through really in depth about 3 of our major core practices, and we talk so much about these because when we talk about the core, that is for everyone. That's for every student in every school every day, and we want to make sure that we're sharing that language, and so that everybody, whether it be students or parents, our community members, our administrators, are all on the same page about what we mean about a healthy behavioral health core. One of the practices we want to highlight is community building circles, and this idea of a restorative practice that anyone can do, that we've had in the district for years, and where it can really build community. An easy way as a check-in question, one of our favorites, is what kind of egg are you today? I encourage you to go to elementary school. They have the best responses to that. But beginning to help teachers have clear and explicit ways of connecting with students. When we think about supplemental, another restorative practice is restorative conversations that Ms. Blitzen discussed. We also engage in student observation, so our team will go out to schools and observe students that may be eligible for an intervention plan. We will work with the team to build their capacity and sort of look at what resources can we give the student to encourage them to remain in the classroom setting. For intensive, we talked a little bit about the behavior intervention plan, that support for students who just really are struggling with some intensive behaviors and thinking through. Some of you may be familiar with the functional behavior assessment, which is where we go in and we look at it and we just try to understand, what does the student need? What is the behavior telling us? And how do we begin to support at a different level? So we work with school teams on that. Principals also have access to a Tier 3 intensive behavior intake form where they can complete a Google Doc and it comes directly to our team. We will deploy out to the school to support when those intensive behaviors are happening. We also have mental health referrals, and restorative reentry is a pilot program through Dr. Walker's department, who is working with students who are excluded to help them to return and remain. So as we talk about restorative practices and the strategies, we recognize we still are burgeoning. We have more to do. We acknowledge that there is more to do for our schools, but we are actively seeking additional strategies to build on the continuum. We have some really good promising practices with our circle keeping and other things that we get really good feedback from teachers and principals about, but we wanted to acknowledge today that we are working on additional strategies to help continue build those relationships, reduce conflict, and give alternatives to exclusionary practices. We wanted to share a little bit about our professional learning plan this year, the ways in which we're supporting teachers and leaders, social emotional learning, explicit instruction and supports for schools to implement that curriculum. Classroom management, we are very proud to have it available on campus, so it's 24/7, 365. When we get those new teachers in, they may not have had that traditional background, but they can access that course at any time. We also have school-wide expectations for school teams, and then additional supports, as Ms. Woodson alluded to, check-in, check-out, restorative conversations, and we also are providing behavior intervention plan training for school teams. So as we talk about reducing suspension rates, and we talked about that 3% for the district across the board, we wanted to highlight one of our elementary schools that surpassed that. Walnut Creek did an exceptional job of the last 2 years of reducing their suspension rate by a little bit more than 11 percentage points. Some of the things that they implemented to get there were those restorative practices. They really started off the beginning of the year at looking at their data and tying it to their school improvement plan. They gave teachers the opportunity to self-select their professional learning. Everyone was trained on classroom management plans and social emotional learning and adult and student emotional regulation and what to do when students escalate and are struggling. We also came in and provided coaching and support and met with the school 4 times a year. When we talk about disproportionality, they also, for Black and Hispanic students, show an almost 10 percentage point decrease, and white students a 4.5 decrease. You may notice 2 or more races looks like it is exceptional and 66.7%. We would love to own that, but unfortunately that was a difference of about 2 students. The subgroup was just really small, so we wanted to point that out. But the other areas, we did have significant improvement in Black and Hispanic and white students. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Ms. Wilson.
Lots of information, certainly, about where we are with regards to behavioral health and goals that we have, to Dr. Walker's comment about the data is the data, but what we do with it is the key next step, right? What are we going to do at the district level? What do we want to encourage schools to do, and how do we problem solve through that? So we want to talk a little bit about what these next steps and these future goals are. So I wanted to kind of begin this by really thinking about what our current state is with regards to behavioral health at our schools, and I think most of our principals, if they were sitting here with you today, or our teachers, would articulate that things are very different than they were several years ago. And we think that that is certainly confounded by the pandemic that existed. The reality is that students had disrupted routines, there was social isolation, mental health issues. All of those emerged with further challenges with regards to for students to be able to be successful in a school environment. We also are very aware of the fact that there is increased exposure to stress and anxiety as a result of the pandemic. Many of the students' families faced heightened financial or emotional or health-related stress during the pandemic, and that impacted kids' behaviors. They felt that, and they responded that way. Students may have experienced loss themselves. They may have had more instability or an adverse childhood experience following the pandemic, which caused them to struggle even further with self-regulation and engagement. And our teachers will even say that they also have experienced some of these challenges through the pandemic, which creates even more of a challenge on behalf of the adults who are in the building with them. And all of those things together certainly highlight a heightened need for us to be able to be very engaged in this work and more proactive. We do want to focus on the fact that we are really looking at those root causes, thinking about trauma and unmet mental health needs. I'll mention a snippet about that hopefully in just a moment as well. And then what are we doing with limited resources, and how do we intervene and think about that specifically? So some of our strategies do include professional learning, and we are working hard to make sure that we have professional learning that Dr. Gooch and Dr. Walker already articulated available for everyone in the continuum, teachers, school leaders, everyone, as we're moving that work forward, and we will continue to do that and continue to enhance that. We also want to make sure we expand restorative practices, that training and implementation across the district in more and more ways, as we know that will both help, honestly, the adult as well as the student to be more successful in the classroom. Some interventions that we have already put in place, Dr. Gooch just mentioned, we have a pilot that is going on actually right now with about 8 of our schools. This is something we've really tried to do in-house, but it was involving our alternative schools as well as their base schools. What we've noticed is that students that might have been referred to an alternative setting because of some behavior infraction may have had some challenges back at their base school with a student or an adult. And so we are working with the Campbell Law Group to have some restorative activities that are happening with them while they're at their alternative placement, even though it's involving the base school, so that when they go back to base, there's more opportunity for success and a pathway to a brighter future. Very new in this. We will be back to you telling you a little bit more about that data. I will say today I feel like we have some stories. I don't know if I have data yet, but really some positive stories already around that. So really exciting work. In addition to that, I think you are aware as well that we just received a mental health grant through the U.S. Department of Education, which is a sizable grant that will allow us to expand school-based mental health services in the next 5 years. We are actively and heavily engaged into getting those systems and structures moving forward. We do already have school-based mental health in about 40 of our schools. We also have introduced telehealth this year, and we've had some success with that as well. This will be an additional layer to add on top of that, which we know is desperately needed. So really excited about some of those opportunities. And then ultimately, our goal is overall to just increase behavioral health supports and consequently reduce that suspension rate, but also just the daily interactions of what might be termed as negative behaviors in a classroom or a school setting across the board. It will help students feel better about being in school. It will enhance relationships on a day-to-day basis, and again, provide more opportunity for those academics to be successful. We will continue to expand our programming, make restorative practices more universal in schools, and we want to make sure that we are constantly at the district and school level looking at our data so that we can focus our efforts around professional learning and really just our strategy to support schools as we go forward. So I will pause there, and we'll be more than happy to take some questions.
Great. Well, thank you all for really diving into this topic, and also thank you for the work that we're doing to close these gaps and to address these issues. And I'm always excited when I see the restorative circles or trainings, because Attorney Powell trained me when I was a teacher at the district, and I took a lot of those practices to bring in my classroom to help foster those relationships, to build that safe place and that trust, so students, when they had those rough days, they knew this is a safe place you can come to. And a great lesson or saying that comes out of that is that the stories may leave the stories stay in the circles, but the lessons leave the circle. So therefore, you do not violate folks' trust when folks are opening up. And so I'll go around the table for questions. Chair Haggard.
So I have a couple questions, but they're kind of all over the place. I apologize. Dr. Walker, you shared some great data with us, and I just had a question in terms of like how we look and how we analyze that data. If we look at the number of suspensions and lost days, I wanted to know how's that calculated. Is that like the total numbers of hours we would typically have in a school year and the number of students that we have?
In the sense of the lost days of instruction?
So I mean, like, what is our total, how do you come up with the total numbers of days of instruction? And, well, let me ask it this way. If you go to that, you'll see a dip, right, in, say, number of out-of-school suspension days. And so we know that there has been there have been fewer out-of-school suspension days. But what I'm trying to understand is this is not occurring in like a snapshot of time, this is over time. And over time, our student population, our enrollment numbers are growing. So if we're constant, and enrollment can go up and down, but if from last year, from 22, 23 to 23, 24, we've added students, does the addition of students and the number of either suspensions or number of students suspended going down indicate maybe a better rate of reduction
What you're talking about is
than what we're
rate.
seeing?
Right, yeah. These are raw numbers, right? 13,210 suspensions, how many days were that? But but we are aware of the enrollment and that, rate may impact that, right? It's just what's your net product that would even improve as well, right?
Yeah.
But the enrollment hasn't increased or changed that much, I think, to
Make it like a market
significantly
difference.
make any difference, right?
And then I really appreciate the Walnut Creek example, because oftentimes when we look at this work and we look at the different practices and strategies we employ, you wonder what is effective, and being able to have a really good case study like that really brings home and supports that work. So thank you for sharing that. And then kind of just a general question. We talked at the end about intervention and interventionists. And unlike our committee chair, I don't have the same level of knowledge or understanding of what all those interventionist duties and tasks are. I know that sometimes instead of sitting in a board seat, we get very different feedback about, and I'll be blunt with it, the usefulness and effectiveness of interventionists in different situations. I've heard just anecdotally some wonderful stories about life-changing work done by some interventionists, and I've heard criticism about, we have staff in schools in this role when we could be using those resources for other work that might have more direct impacts. Could you tell me a little bit about what everything we're calling an interventionist, who they are and what they do?
I will attempt to tackle that for you. I will tell you that some of these interventions may be delivered by an interventionist. They could be delivered by the core teacher. They could be, as I was talking about as an example for check-in, check-out, could be just a trusted adult that I, at this particular school, might have. So it could be delivered by a variety of people. But in general, an interventionist works both with academics and behavior. So they may be doing small groups around literacy, around mathematics, and or behavior, and really looking at the specific needs of that student first. What is it that we see as the largest gap that student has, and then they're going to design instruction that tries to meet that gap and tries to implement instruction on a consistent basis over time, and they're going to continually progress monitor, right? They're going to watch along the way to make sure that if it's Michelle that is in that intervention, if we're working on, I'll go back to make sure you turn in your homework as a behavior intervention, that they monitor me over 3 or 4 weeks, and if I am able to turn in my homework every single day, that's wonderful, and we might need to back off on that intervention. If I've only turned in my homework twice out of 4 weeks, we still might need to do an additional strategy or something to keep this going. So they're constantly monitoring to make sure that the intervention is working, or do we need to adapt it? What adjustments need to be made?
And I think, Mr. Hershey, as we think about that role, I'm sorry, Mr. Haggard, as we think about that role, it is thinking about the professional development that we're providing and the training and support that we're providing. I think that we previously had our interventionists in one group, and now we're looking at those individuals as key roles in helping us with some of our work for academics as well as behavior, and making sure that they're cross-trained and that our district staff is involved in the training. So where one individual department was working with them around only intervention, thinking about how do we support core practices and continuing that connection between academics and behavior so that we are strengthening their roles. And so we do have some wonderful stories of the work that's happening in schools. But we also had some confusion around, so what does the intervention coordinator do? And what are the expectations? And so spending some time really clarifying the roles, especially around the training that we provide and the interactions that we have with these individuals so that we get more consistency across schools.
So just in explaining the interventionist's role versus intervention work that a teacher or an instructional assistant might do, how would, can you give me, contrast some of the different ways that would take place?
An interventionist who's outside the classroom may provide professional development to teachers.
Okay.
They may work with some identified students who may be having more challenging behaviors. It could very well be, depending on the needs of the school, the intervention coordinator could be working more academically. And so those roles are really thinking about both sides of the continuum, academics and behavior. And so it is really targeting students who move to that next level of support. And it could be in the area of behavior, it could be in the area of instructional supports that's beyond what the classroom teacher can do.
Thank you.
And in some examples, there are also teachers as well that teach, whether it's beginning math with certain students to make sure that they're being brought up to grade level and whatnot. So they all play a key role. It looks different. I've seen some in some schools I've toured is where those interventionists also work with beginning teachers to help get them on par. My mentor teacher was an interventionist in Lower, so we shared the same students. We learned different strategies that may worked in her class that I may have struggled with this student. So it's also, I've seen great success when those relationships are there and they're giving feedback back to both parties to show what's working, what's not working, so we can keep regrouping. And so it just looks very unique based on the situations.
Thank you. Of course.
Dr. Ng, do you have a question?
Yeah, I do. I really feel like the meshing of the academic and behavior and how to handle it is important. The question I have is for myself who is uninitiated. Can you give me some examples of how you go about restorative practices, conversations? You talk about restorative reentry. Can you give me some paint a picture of it?
Paint a picture.
Sure. I can paint a picture of what it might look like for adults or with students in the school. When you go into a school and you start at the core for restorative practices, what we really like to see before we even get into circle keeping is we like to see people standing at the door, greeting students. We like to see people calling the students by their names during the instructional day. We want to hear that you know something about the student, what they did that week, making intentional efforts to connect, and that you have articulated ways of developing relationships with students like you and maybe not like you. So when we conduct walkthroughs, those are things that we look for that are not necessarily what some people might consider the touchy-feely component of like a circle. But we do have teachers all across the district who are trained circle keepers. And essentially that could be the first 5 or 10 minutes of your classroom where you come together and you just have some conversation. It can be a simple question, sort of the egg question, or it can be, tell me a little bit about how your weekend was, or anything of that nature to build community so students begin to know more about each other and the teacher knows about every student in their classroom in terms of touch points that they can build upon. So it is complex and there are layers and tiers of service, but at the core level, that's a place where anybody in any classroom across the district can start the work.
I'm just going to tag on one thing that a lot of this is the core work of what everybody needs to do. The only thing I wanted to tag on is that in general, and I'm going to use an example again, if there are harmful words said, if I say something unkind to my friend, Dr. Gooch over here, I've caused harm, right? She is harmed, she is hurt based on the words that I said. So it is important for us to be able to repair that relationship and create the conditions where we can make that happen. That's where the restorative nature comes back, and that allows us then to engage in normal activity again. Many times, if we never give space to the opportunity to restore that harm that might have been done, then we, as humans, tend to build walls, and that's where we tend to create more and more problems over time. And rather than letting it fester, we want to make sure that we give opportunity to be able to address the harm that was caused. Let me know that I hurt her and that I needed to say that I'm sorry, or that I need to address that in a different way, whatever is necessary. And she needs to be able to speak to me about how she feels, and then we can move on from that moment. But that's a lot of the backbone of what restorative conversations and restorative practices do.
Just a follow-up. I mean, what if it's already escalated to another level?
Good point.
You know, where do you go from there? Yeah.
So, I mean, ultimately, that you're going to have to evaluate that based on the circumstance and what exactly is happening. Sometimes some time needs to take place before you can come back together and have a conversation. And there might be different kinds of restorative practices we might use. So it might be a mediation that we might need to have as opposed to that. And that's why it's facilitated by your district staff to be able to support that process. But in many times it does elevate, and we need some cool down time. We need some opportunity to take a minute and really reflect on what has happened. I need to self-reflect on what I've done and how my actions might have been perceived by someone else. And just, again, teaching those skills to students so that they can do that themselves independently.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I have a couple questions. Like Chris, I'm a little bit all over the place, so just help me fill in some things. I love some of the things that you said, proactive, not reactive. That's awesome. And the relationships are important, and I do agree with that, because learning by example also is, pretty key for the kids to see what the good behavior looks like. While you're going through all this, can you tell us, can we have data on, and I'm sure you can't do this today, but on what the suspensions are? Like, we're seeing numbers and percentages in certain areas. It tells us like the amount of students versus, if it's in school or out of school. But is there a way for us to have that kind of data where we can kind of pinpoint where some of our bigger struggles are? Like, is it a lot of vaping? Is there a lot of cutting class? Is it a lot of behavioral issue? Is that in there?
It's in the supplemental.
It's
another attachment.
Those two reports.
So I had them all open, and I think I had one open like 3 times. So.
Again, it's a lot of data, right? And so in the summary report, there's several tabs. One of the tabs is tab 8, in the sense of at least why are kids being excluded. And you may not be surprised if you think about the rule of conduct, it's fighting. Physical aggression is our number 1. Number 2 is narcotics, right? But yes, we have that.
And the reason I was asking is because I noticed that if you scroll down on, I think it's page 28, like in District 1, I'm almost double what our other districts are as far as numbers go. And it's concerning. So I just feel like, digging a little bit deeper. But
the 22.3, 22%. Yeah.
So it's
versus-
pretty high. And,
Right.
I know you were helping me with some of the numbers going back to years even prior to COVID.
Right.
And our numbers are significantly higher now. Like the 22-23 year, you had 50,000 out-of-school suspensions, and before that. So I'm just trying to understand like what some of the concerns are.
But we'll have to
Obviously,
look
we're
at that number.
setback.
We've never had 50,000 out-of-school suspensions. So we'll
Okay.
look
So
at that and specifically what we're looking at. Not even incidents.
So if you look at number of out-of-school suspension days on the screen, it says 50,000, but each of those suspensions might be 10 days. So the number of suspensions would be maybe
Days isn't incidents.
5,000.
Yeah, days isn't incidents.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And I think that was some of the struggle when I was going back and forth looking at this is, it's kind of all different things, trying to figure out where it is, which I'm sure you guys are trying to figure out the best way to. One of my concerns is, like, we get a lot of feedback from the teachers, you know, and just recently, you know, there's somebody was speaking to us about, you know, like, I mean, obviously behaviors, you know, throwing chairs, and, you know, I've spoken to a teacher that was in middle school and another one that was in elementary school, and, you know, they got seriously hurt, you know, from the students. So how do we reach out to our teachers, showing them that we are supporting them, and what do we provide them in classroom as support, knowing that, so that they could focus on the class at hand while something is happening? What do we do? And maybe that does go a little bit with what you were saying, where a central office will come out and help them address, but what do we do at that particular time when something's happening? Can you walk us through that?
Sure. Well, in the moment, and I'll speak from my principal lens, right? In that moment, when I was a principal, and I think most of our principals would agree at this point in time, we're going to do the very best we can in that moment and that at school to isolate that situation and to de-escalate the challenge, right? So making sure that, first of all, teachers have some professional learning in how to go about doing that. But the reality is it depends on the circumstance, but if there's somebody throwing chairs, we're going to either isolate that student or move the other students out of the classroom with the teacher. Something will happen so that no one gets hurt, is the goal and what we're going to try to do in that moment. At the district level, we will support with professional learning, but we do have a team that will go out and support the school in how to best come up with strategies kind of for the classroom, but also for that individual student. How do we address the challenges that student may have so that we don't continue to see those behaviors repeated?
So let me reword it, because I think you answered exactly how I might have asked, but I'm asking about the teachers. What do we do to support our teachers? Because this is also very hard for them. You know, while they're trying to focus on class, they're, you know, obviously a little shaken, and, you know, things happen for them too. So what do we do to help them?
I think because that's a scenario, it depends on the particular situation. So if it is a child that is extreme, then the principal may reach out for some continued support from Dr. Cooper's team. The child could be identified as EC, and we may assign a behavior person to the classroom. So there's so many factors depending on the situation, kind of what has transpired, and how we might work through it. And so I think not having all of the details, do we have central office support that we can send in? Yes. But do we have enough central office support for every situation that happens in a building? We don't. And so we have to partner with the principal and their team of counselors, social workers, and other individuals that they have to wrap around and provide that support. But there's support within the district office, on the EC side with behavior, as well as if it's a non-EC student, there's support with Dr. Gooch's team. And so, and that could be support to help the teacher to make her feel or him feel more comfortable as we are reacclimating the student, or it could very well be supports for the child that's in the classroom.
Okay.
I think in this scenario, it always goes back to school-based. Mm-hmm. Every teacher has a supervisor, as an AP that they can go to feel that they can talk to, seek help, or go directly to a principal. So I think I often tell teachers when they reach out, that's your first step. Find your person in the building, whether it's your direct supervisor, an assistant principal, a principal. Go same way we tell students to go up the chain of commands, our teachers have to do the same, so therefore they can get that same support. But I also know it's hard out here for teachers. I mean, ever since the pandemic, school looks completely different. So a lot of issues that students didn't have to deal with, they're now dealing with them and more. So I think we have to give each other grace in this moment and having those conversations. But I just wanted to add that as
Yeah, no, and that's one thing I hear about often, so that's why I wanted to kind of bring that up and see how we can support them. And to kind of add to that a little bit, my next question was going to be more about what kind of parent involvement are we trying to expect, because I think that helps not only the student, the whole classroom as a whole, but also the teachers when they're having, you know, difficulty. And, you know, Beaver Dam Elementary School, you sat with me, and she had more bodies in the classroom, you know, using her Restart Fund, so that was, you know, absolutely helpful for her. But she also had a parent that was now kind of advocating for the school, because she realized when they sat down and they talked about it, the changes that she was able to help make for her son not only helped in the classroom, but helped at home as well. So what kind of parent involvement do we want to expect, and who are we trying to reach?
Yeah, I think we are going to and will continue to advocate from the very beginning in which a teacher starts to see those behaviors. We want to have communication because our parents are our partners, right? We need to work together, and somebody commented that some of the strategies used in the classroom might be able to be used at home, vice versa. There may be strategies at home that might work well in a classroom. We want to partner together about what we're doing from the very beginning all the way through. Hopefully it doesn't happen, but if there is a student that ultimately is suspended, we want to make sure we're in partnership and continually talking and interacting with families all along the way with regards to whatever strategies might be best and how we can best support their students.
Okay, thank you. And if I can have one more question, I'll leave it at that. What will we be using the mental health grant towards?
They will be working towards school-based mental health so that we can provide mental health services in our schools for students that need that support.
Okay. So the things that you listed before, like the professional development, and so it's just
yes, but
basically
and mental health
base.
providers would be located in our schools so that we don't even have to refer to go to, find an appointment somewhere else at a different time, that families will be able to have students to be seen while they're in the school building during the school day. So again, it should break down equity issues and making sure that we have access and opportunity for kids to get those needed services.
So it's the same services, just helping you expand to do more of it. Yeah, okay, thanks.
Ms. Johnson-Hassel.
Right, and I also have Mrs. Rice's. I'll start with mine because most of our questions overlap. We both led with outstanding presentation. I will also note, I can't say enough about noting the importance of a child knowing that there's a safe person in a building. It is the #1 protective factor, and we have not really spent our time talking about that for a very long time, so I'm glad to hear, not just hear it, but I can tell when you talk about it that you believe that, and I think that will be translated to our schools. Chief Ellis definitely knows that every time I read my school SIPs, I always say, why don't I see practical things like, hello, Dr. Gooch, every time that you walk in? It's so good because I believe that those are things that change the structure and intervention of a school, that if a child knows that there is someone who cares about them, and people confuse, children know that when you care for them, you also give consequences, right? It's hard to give a consequence and respect the consequence if there's no relationship based in the consequence. So I don't know how you do this school-wide, but my only avenue was I'd always be like, can I get that in a SIP? Can you tell every SIP that they should be making sure teachers are greeting every day, hey, good to see you, little Robert. The difference, I mean, people joke, but,
It's not a small thing.
it is a real thing.
It is.
And if we think about our own, especially those of us who have school trauma, it is often steeped in the lack of relationship and care in a building. And so I can't leave this board without personally saying what I came to this board saying is the data still distresses me. It distresses me that our black and brown kids don't receive the same care. And by care, I mean relational care. The people who are cared for are the people you don't see show up in these data points. And that's just the reality of our culture. No, it's not just a WCPSS thing, it is who we are as a culture. When people are cared for, you actually see them responding in the ways that we want them to. I also believe that that's true for adults, which gets to me and Mrs. Rice's points of I appreciate that you're doing some proactive work, and of course I appreciate the case study with Walnut Creek. Elementary school, just still something about, as soon as I open this, something that just grates my nerves that we have to focus on suspending elementary school kids. Like when I came aboard, I was like, wait, y'all suspend 5-year-olds? We do. So I'm still adjusting to that is a mechanism we still use. We had a former board member who asked for a moratorium. We did not get it on elementary schools. But the question that she asked is, which I think is a good one. She said you talked a little bit about this, but specifically, she was like, how are we supporting staff with more emotional regulation support for them, considering the found success that we've seen in those interventions? And again, I've talked about this from some of my ramp visits, that some of our schools have things throughout the building, not just for kids. Teachers should also use the starfish. Adults can use the starfish breathing. So I guess that's her question. I'm asking, have we thought about how do we also do that for adults? Because we don't talk about adult emotional regulation, but post-COVID, actually during COVID, for all of us who witnessed full-on school, my daughter was in school during COVID, and I'm watching teachers, I'm like, I think they should use the starfish. Right? It was the first time we could see for ourselves that our teachers were human. Every adult in those buildings are human and experience the same emotions that our young people do. And I hope the teachers who know that I love and care for them, I say this because they're human, and we talk about them and treat them as though they're not. We also pay them like they're not human. But I think this is a space that we can talk about this, and my idea was teachers should have a respite, just so you know. I do, because I think that we forget that we overload them as well. So that's our question is, are there ways that we can think about ensuring, how do we build this into professional development long term? Like around, like in all parts of our district, noting that when we're doing PD, that should not be something that's frowned upon. They should feel cared for as well. And we should be their trusted people.
Yeah, I would agree. I will say, I know Dr. Wilson Norman has, and I'm going to get to my old life in academics here a little bit.
I know you put your principal hat on.
I know, we've done a few hats, but the reality is we are trying to integrate some of what we know is best practice from that social emotional learning throughout our curriculum. And when we do professional learning, to your point, whether it's literacy professional learning or math professional learning, how do we take a moment and think about how do we collaborate with our peers? How do we, what are some of the strategies we can use to be able to be more and more successful as a human, as an adult, as a student, whatever that might look like. I have been pleased, as we've talked a little bit about this pilot as well, to see that we've had some administrators, after having some professional learning and restorative practices, that we're of course intending that they have with it, that their interactions with students might change, but they have been reflective upon their own interactions, maybe even with each other, and at home, when they go home to their own children, what does this look like and how might I behave in a different way, use a different strategy that's going to help me be more successful. I think the more pervasive we can make it, the better.
I think Ms. Rice is very pleased that so some of her questions you answered and she let me know that, but her next one was, like, and I've never asked this question, is how do schools use these practices, including restorative practice, with the adults in the building too, right? Like, how do we model what we're also teaching?
So, if I may.
You go, please.
When we provide the professional learning, for many schools, we'll do SEL 101. And the basics of like the brain, trauma-informed, social-emotional learning.
You're speaking my love language.
I'm so glad. When we go places, even we have academics throughout everything that's done with academics and SLM. There are inclusion activities where it's modeled for principals, for APs, for teachers, whenever we're doing any professional learning of how to connect and things that people can take back with them to model and use. We try to use the language of social-emotional learning, trauma-informed practices, restorative practices. That's sort of the lens in your glasses that you look through. It's not a thing, it's the thing, the way you sort of see the work and approach the work. And we work with adults in that, modeling easy ways and also foundationally for them to sort of understand that it is not, we're just ignoring what students or adults do, but it's separating the doer from the deed.
Great example.
Dr. Walker and I are having the same response. We are viscerally like, yes, thank you. So, and I think you led to that. So I'm gonna add again, merge our questions here. Ms. Ray's question is, how do we ensure that this is the first option for our schools, not the last option? Which my question was going to be, we always talk about scale, and scale is hard, so I'm going to ask it a different way. How do we take a pilot and make it the practice? Because when we talk about scale, we're trying to scale to 200 now plus schools. we'll never get to scaling, if you will, but are there elements of a pilot that then just become the structure for our schools?
That's exactly where we're aiming to go. Is we literally, and my hope is that we're going to have schools advocate for it, right? They're going to see the positive results that are already happening. Again, those stories are coming in at this point already to say, I'm no longer angry with Dr. Gooch, who I might have had an encounter with, right? And I might be the teacher who might have been angry, right? We have resolved that harm, and I now am looking forward to having her come back into my classroom. And those stories from educator to educator, I think, are the very best. So we want to make sure we can elevate those as we go forward.
Sorry, Mr. Swanson, it's two people's questions. So the other question is, how does the district currently measure effectiveness of professional development in reducing suspension, which we both accurately agree that also means improving cultural competency. You're a school district, I'm sure you have some profound measurement.
So I think that's happening in a variety of ways. Some of that happens in our teacher working conditions, right? Some of that happens through other survey data that we gather after professional learning occurs. We ultimately, in my mind, part of what we want to see is when we do walkthroughs with classrooms, we want to see change. That's the ultimate goal, right? Is do we see change happening in a classroom with the interaction between the adults and the students? And we are working on more and more of those walks. We have specifically a walkthrough tool aligned to Lever 3 that Dr. Wilson-Norman has in our learning model, and that is about making sure that we have these systems and structures in place. So we're looking for them, and we not just central offices. We want each other to be looking for those things that in place in classrooms.
And I think you answered this one a little bit, and that's how our mental health and social emotional learning resources integrated to address the root causes. And I would say, how do you do that with your adults so that they know that if Monica is acting out every day, even if that acting out is sleeping in your class every day, it's not because Monica is a horrible person, it's because there is a root cause. And so how do we assure that that's the first line of thinking?
When we go in to work with school teams, those are the things we ask. We ask if we've been able to do a health assessment, vision, hearing. We ask, have we looked at the students' records? Have we done a home visit? We ask to try to figure out what's happening or what has happened to the student. As you referred to a 5-year-old, they're often modeling behavior that they've seen somewhere. It didn't just come from nowhere. And so once we can unpack that and figure out what's happening, unfortunately, there are often things happening at home as well that the family needs supports for, and so we partner with our colleagues across CAS to then engage and support the family and get them the things that they need, which ultimately can support the students.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Chair, if I could, and I know the administration leadership has done a wonderful job in sharing what we do, and so there's not really much that I need to say, but this really is about professional development, how we have expectations for everybody in the building, and how it is making sure that people know and understand that these practices are necessary. So when Dr. Gooch talked about restorative practices, these are things that we've been doing for years and for decades before we ever called it this. And so it is about making sure that we put teachers in a position to know and understand that this kind of work is necessary. And I can tell you that when we go into buildings, we absolutely see this taking place. We were at Laurel Park Elementary yesterday for SLT, and I think it was either next step or second step curriculum. Second step. Yeah, we happened to go into a classroom, and there the teacher was engaging in that. And so everything really is about helping at least the adults in the building to understand that this is necessary. They have to believe it. I was actually at a training that they had this morning on diversity and inclusion. And what I said to everybody is that we can talk about these things, but there are really some people that may not believe this is necessary. And so when we talk about behavioral practices, The old adage is that if the kid is acting up, they need to be put out of school.
Right.
That's the old school thinking. And so we do have to recognize that some people may not believe this, but it's going to take time that we do the professional development and have the expectations that this kind of stuff does take place. So.
Ms. Mahaffey?
How often is this data Dr. Walker, I know this is your leg, so I'm just asking for, how often is this data gathered centrally and looked at, especially as we're looking at the number of incidents of suspension? I know for you, it's probably on the daily, but like a whole team coming together.
Right, and I definitely want it to be less about me and even central services, right?
Yeah.
That even in our school leadership meetings, and we're talking about the strands, and I help support the resilient learner, and it's something of each school, right? You might be interested in a certain region, a district, an area, but each of your school, right? How do you not talk about this every day, right? How do you not, right? We have, in my role, in my job, that I focus on is to make sure it's available, make sure it's something that is something that can be digested in a fashion, but we have something called like monthly behavior incidents and per school. And that is a conversation of, okay, what are the rules of conduct that kids are violating? And when I work with principals and they see consistently, it's 2. School class attendance is the number 1 rule of conduct that teachers put in, right? Kids skipping or not being where they need to be. And then it's compliance with directives. And so I just use that as an example of data-driven decisions, right? So we encourage schools to look at that, have that right in hand with your academic data, right? You're looking at your behavior data. And then we, of course, look at it and say, schools, what do you need? We don't want you just to admire the data, right? And I don't want to just produce data for you to continue this. But what do you need in order to actually help make staff, right? Ms. Caulfield, I hear you loud and clear, right? Teachers, right? Teachers, what is the data saying that you need, right? And so my role is to help make sure that we have data in a way that we can do that. So I'd like to say, Ms. Mahaffey, right, on a regular basis, right, it has to be the core work to be looking at this data.
I want to expand on that, though. I think schools on a regular basis, but this year we've engaged in partnership with Ms. Ellis's office on 2 data dive days in which suspension data, academic data, whatever data we have to that point is looked at. So we do one in November and we'll do another one, I think it's in March. Is it February? We'll do another one in February. And so starting to think about some district-wide structures on how we all look at the data. But Dr. Walker works with schools to look at theirs individually, but schools want to look across to see where they are. And so we partnered with our area superintendents and Ms. Ellis to do that work.
And then what is generally the decision, either like, is it a principal asking, is it looking at the data and going, these numbers seem high before, those interventions come in, like professional development is great, personnel supports are great. I'm going to channel my inner Mr. Hershey and say, like, what personnel supports are needed in order to effectively do this?
So I'll use an example. A lot of this data, we are certainly encouraging our student services teams to look at on a regular basis, right? And with administrators as a part of that. So that might be school psychologists, social workers, counselors. In addition to that, that might be the alternative education person that might be assigned at a high school. There's a variety. It could be an intervention coordinator. We want to add to those meetings because those are people that are addressing these challenges in many cases or dealing with root cause. So we first of all want them to look at that data, and once they look at that data, to your point, Ms. Mahaffey, they're going to need to problem solve. What is the lever point that's going to get me the biggest bang for my buck, the best outcome? most immediately, and then what do I need to dig into over time that I'm going to make change with? And it might be a variety of solutions that they come up with. It might be, I need professional learning on this particular topic because we see a repetition, I'm trying to think of one of the examples you just said, of non-compliance. So we might need to go through and have a staff meeting and talk about what does that mean? How can we ensure that we have things in place, and does our staff have good professional learning with regards to that? It also may be that we're going to do something targeted towards our students. Let's help define for you what non-compliance is, right? So we make sure we're all on the same page. It could be a variety of strategies that you use. It could be individualized. I noticed that these 5 students are having a hard time with non-compliance, and I'm going to have a counselor do a small group with those students to actually kind of get into their thinking about why they are having a hard time with non-compliance. I think it's a variety of responses, but it's based on what that data is telling that school at that time.
And then when you look at this holistically, and you look at the schools that have a number of incidents, and you think like, how much teacher turnover is there? What are the level of transitory students that are there? What are the other factors that, we talk about bias, right? What are those other factors, and how do we then, look at that? Because we have some schools where it's one kid was suspended in elementary school, and some where it's much, much more. And so, I don't know. I don't have an answer, and I know you guys are working hard, and just thank you.
Thank you. I have 3. So have y'all intended for us to, in another meeting, take a deeper dive into the 2 reports that you attached? Or no?
No.
Okay. And then, Dr. Taylor, I believe for a while the state support for professional development of any kind was pretty anemic. I don't know if that's changed much in recent years. So do y'all feel like you have, I guess that's sort of a dumb question, in that we all need more resources for all the things. But is that something that we really need to prioritize, as this support so strongly supports academics? Is that something that the board should, have front of mind as we work with Dr. Taylor on the new budget?
I would say that probably our largest struggle, while we would always want more money, is time.
Okay.
So when do we get access to teachers where it's not their summer break, it's not at the beginning of the school year? So I think figuring out time and how we can provide the support where it feels like support and not, my mind is back at my classroom or something. So I would say the greatest challenge is time.
That's really helpful. Thank you for lifting that up. My last question is, how are your 2 teams, so Dr. Walker, your team, and then Michelle Woodson, your team, how are y'all working with the special education department and getting alignment there to improve things?
Yeah, the reality is that this is a continuum, right? It starts with core, I keep referring, which is all students in every classroom every day, right? All the way to specialized instruction and students who might need specific specialized instruction with regards to supports for that. So we work together many times a week, sometimes many times a day. I would say our teams are talking to people on their team as well almost every single day, if not every single day.
And that's true for your office too, Dr. Walker?
Absolutely, yep.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, there's not a day that I don't speak in the sense of regarding special education. It is continual. And I'll even raise up another aspect that you did not mention is also students who have a Section 504.
Yes.
That's what I thought you were going to say.
Yes.
There are also students with disabilities and ever growing, so we look at that group as well.
And I have a follow-up. Sure. Dr. Taylor, will that communication structure with those 3 departments working to make improvements here, even though that's ongoing, is that going to change some with your restructuring, or do you anticipate that it'll improve with your
Not
research?
necessarily change, but I know, particularly with exceptional children, I actually will, Barbara wasn't able to meet with me today. She was out sick, but I did meet with Chris McCabe, so that we talked through some recommendations and next steps that they have. Part of what the restructuring that Dr. Wilson will share will show how that restructuring of the EC department will really make sure we have services in place and not this big monolith. And so I don't anticipate there to be that kind of change, just restructuring where things are.
Thank you. That's all I had.
Well, thank you all for such a robust conversation. And there's always more work to be continued. It's great to acknowledge the strides that we're gaining, but we also know that there's still more work that needs to be done in order to continue to make some gains. And as we wrap up, I would take a moment of personal privilege to acknowledge to Committee Vice Chair Monika Johnson-Hosser. I just want to publicly say thank you for pushing and making sure that I'm aligned, we're aligned, and the conversation we've had with Dr. Wilson-Norman of what we want to see in this committee, what topics we want to bring forward. So I hope that I have been as good as a chair to you than Ms. Waters was to me when I sat in that role. And so your voice will be missed, but also know you're just a phone call away, and or text. So I look forward to working with Ms. Mahaffey as she takes the lead at this committee. And thank you all for the great conversations, and that will adjourn our meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.